And as I blacked out or went out, the lights went out, but then I felt light come. I felt light come and surround me. It was like tangible light. It felt comforting, like it was holding me in this horrible, terrible situation. And it felt like I was rising above, like rising above the accident scene. And I was actually a little bit confused, like what's going on? Because gosh, now I could breathe. There was no pain. I was very much alive. I was a regular guy, grew up on a family farm, worked in marketing, ran an advertising agency. I had been a Division One athlete. I was probably a red personality, like, gosh, let's go, let's win, let's beat the other guy, let's, do all those things. And, I mean, I was married, I had two children, I had a lovely wife, but I was a pretty mainstream, typical person. When the NDE happened, it was the result of an automobile accident. And I was young. I was 33 years old. It's been 28 years ago. And some time has passed. I couldn't talk about it for almost a decade. And now I talk about it a lot, and I can. I mean, it's important to keep in mind it's been 28 years. I mean, I couldn't speak of it for a long time without being overly emotional, and it was difficult to share. But yeah, we had a really bad car crash. It was a single car rollover, and I was driving the car. One of the most difficult parts of the story is I may have dozed off. I may have just nodded off and swerved to the right and then overcorrected to the left, which caused me to lose control of the car, and then the car began to roll. And I blacked out, for that actual crashing. But when the car came to a stop, I was completely conscious. And the first thing I became aware of was my 7-year-old son in the back seat behind me, crying hysterically. And as a father, I I knew, gosh, I've got to get to my boy. I've got to get to my son. And that's when I realized I could not move. I mean, I was pinned. I was a little bit disoriented. I didn't know if I was pinned to the seat or the floorboard. I mean, there was all the broken glass. I was unaware of my injuries. I didn't realize what had happened. I knew I was in pain. I knew I was struggling to breathe and maintain consciousness. But the adrenaline, I had taken over, and I didn't realize that both of my legs had been crushed and shattered. My left leg was eventually amputated above the knee. My back had been damaged. My rib cage had been damaged. My lungs were collapsing. My right arm had almost been completely torn off, and then the seatbelt cut through and ruptured all my insides. Physically, I was a goner. I was a mess. But emotionally, gosh, my son is crying. I've got to get to my boy. And that's when I realized that no one else was crying. That's when I knew, and I was very much aware that my wife and my youngest son had been killed in the accident. And it was a horrible feeling. It was a very, there aren't words to really explain. Here I am pinned, I'm losing consciousness. I've got a hysterical 7-year-old I can't get to. I don't know how badly he's hurt, but based on his crying, I believe he's okay. He's hurt, but he's going to be okay. But my wife and my youngest son were not okay. And I was aware of that. I knew at the scene of the accident that they had passed. And that was the setting. I mean, I don't share that to be morbid, but that was the setting. And as I blacked out or went out. The lights went out, but then I felt light come. I felt light come and surround me. It was like tangible light. It felt comforting, like it was holding me in this horrible, terrible situation. And it felt like I was rising above, like rising above the accident scene. And I was actually a little bit confused, like what's going on? Because gosh, now I could breathe. There was no pain. I was very much alive. I mean, I suppose my spirit or soul left my body, but I was very much alive. I mean, uh, I was held in this light, and then my wife, who I knew was deceased at the scene, suddenly she was there in the light with me. She was there and very much alive, beautiful. She didn't display any of the injuries that took her life. However, she was emphatic that, Jeff, you can't stay. You've got to go. You can't be here. You've got to go back. And we had this conversation. We had this conversation as if I stayed with her, our 7-year-old son, our surviving son, would be orphaned. And for whatever reason, she could not come back, but I could. And she was just emphatic, saying, "You've got to go back. You've got to go back." And we made a choice. We made a choice, and I chose to come back. That was a very profound goodbye, to make that decision. And then coming back, I mean, we have no idea how powerful our thoughts are. I didn't have to think about how do I go back when I made that choice, when I had that intention, I'm going back. Then whew, I was whisked away and suddenly found myself moving about a very busy level 1 trauma center, emergency room hospital. And I had no concept of time in this bubble of light, but I later realized that people had arrived at the scene. I was told all of this. People had arrived at the scene. Spencer, my 7-year-old, was banged up pretty good, but he was going to be okay. I had to be extricated from the car and life flighted or airlifted, to the nearest level 1 trauma center. I didn't know any of that. I knew I'd crashed. I knew I'd said this profound goodbye, and then I was wandering about the hospital, very much aware, almost like a 360-degree awareness of the patients, the doctors, the nurses, even the families of the patients. It's like I knew everything. I was aware, and I was experiencing it in such a way that everyone I encountered, I knew them. I knew them perfectly. I knew their thoughts. I knew their love. I knew their hope. I knew their motivations. I even knew they're angry. And, I felt and knew everything, but there was no judgment of any of it. As I felt them, there was just this profound sense of love. That there was a nurse that passed by me in the hallway, now completely unaware of me, but I was absolutely aware of her. I was aware of the abuse she had received as a child, like almost like it was my own, like there was a connection, there was a oneness. And in that same moment that I'm aware of these details of her life, in that same moment, I see the magnificence of her soul. It's like, wow, she experienced all that. And here she is helping, healing, serving in a hospital. And this was true of everyone I encountered. I was seeing these souls in such a different way. In fact, I felt at the time that I was seeing them as God sees us. I was seeing them as these magnificent souls. I was aware of their lives, and there was no judgment, only this reverence for who they are. And I was having this profound experience, and then I came upon a body I didn't feel anything from, which I thought was odd. And I stepped closer to look, and that's when I realized that's me. That's me. And yet it wasn't me. I was having this connected experience, but there was my body. I mean, there was my skin suit, that we go through this life in. And I stepped closer and looked, and there was a profound sorrow at how broken my body was. And at the same time, this magnificent reverence. It's like, wow, there's my body. I took it for granted. I didn't ever think about the fact that I didn't have to remind my heart to beat. I didn't have to think about my lungs breathing. There I was looking at this magnificent machine of the body, and I knew I had agreed to get back in it, and mine was so broken. It was so banged up. And again, just thoughts, intention. I didn't have to figure out how do I get back in, but it was just the decision, like the intention. I'm going in, and then boom, I was back in the body, back into the heaviness. I mean, the grief, the trauma, the pain, both physically and emotionally, the guilt. I was driving the car. I mean, it was very heavy to be in the hospital. I was ventilated. They had a big tube down my throat during the breathing for my lungs. My legs were immobile, having been crushed. This arm was immobile, having been torn out. And they eventually tied down this hand because I kept grabbing at everything. But there I was back in the body, but it had this profound out-of-body experience. Very conscious, outside of the body. It wasn't in my brain. It was something bigger, something different. I call it a spirit or a soul, consciousness. There's all kinds of words for it, but yeah, I was very conscious outside of my body, and then boom, back in it. Still with the same consciousness, but with all the physical trauma that went with that. The hospital was interesting. I was in the hospital for almost 6 months. I had 18 surgeries in all, putting me back together. My family was so supportive. I was so lucky. I was blessed that way to have, brothers and family, and even my workmates. Everyone was so supportive as I healed. And perhaps the most profound experience was at the end of my hospital stay. And it may be worth pointing out that the two most profound experiences were at the scene of the accident, before morphine or any narcotics had been administered to me. And then at the end of my hospital stay, when I was out of ICU, I was out of surgical recovery, I was out of regular hospital, I was just in the rehabilitation wing. And I was off of the heavy narcotics. And gosh, I was such a mess. I had done so much, but my left leg was amputated. My right leg was in a brace sticking straight out. This arm was in a sling. They'd been working on the shoulder. I had a colostomy bag because of the ruptured intestines. But I was finally able to sleep on my side, which is my natural way of sleeping. I had laid so long on my back that I'd rubbed all the hair off the back of my head. I was bald on the back side of my head. And one particular night, I was sleeping. I had rolled on my side, and I was sleeping, but it was strange because I became very I became conscious of the fact that I was sleeping peacefully. And I'm like, well, wait a minute. I mean, I'm sleeping, but I'm conscious that I'm sleeping peacefully. I had been unconscious. I had certainly fallen asleep, but I was sleeping so peacefully. And then I felt that light come again, that same light as at the accident scene. Comforting. I was in so much grief at the loss of half the family. Again, the light surrounded me. It felt like I was rising above the hospital bed. But this time the light, it dispensed. It disappeared. It went away. And I was in the most beautiful, incredible place. Uh, I mean, there's words like heaven or the spirit world or the other side. The only word that comes close to what I was experiencing is I felt as if I was home. I was home. It's like oh my gosh, I know this. This is so familiar. It's so welcoming. And I was elated and I was whole. I had both legs and both feet and I was not injured and I began running. I began running thinking I'm whole and I'm home. And it was such a physical experience. I mean, I could feel the energy of the ground beneath my feet. I could feel the intelligence in my toes and in my calves and in my thighs. And I began running thinking I'm whole. I'm healed. This was all a bad dream. I'm home. And as I was having this experience, I had the knowing, that was just a knowing I wasn't there to stay. And about that same time, there was this corridor off to my left, and I knew intuitively I'm to go that way. I'm to go down this corridor. And I did. I began working my way down the corridor, and then I could see at the end of the corridor was a crib. Now, Griffin, my little boy, was just a toddler at the time of the accident. He was still sleeping in a crib. He was 14 months old, just barely starting to walk and talk a little bit. And so I was very intrigued by this crib. I went down this corridor. I got to the crib. I looked in the crib, and there was my little boy. And he was sleeping beautifully. And as a father, I swept him up and I held him. And it felt, it was so tangible, so physical. I don't know if you've ever picked up a sleeping child, but there's a weight, there's a heat to them, and I could hold him, and I felt him against me, and he felt solid, and his little rib cage was expanding, and I could feel his breath on my neck. And I leaned over. I even smelled his hair. I thought, this is my boy. This is my son. And I held him. I began to weep, thinking, wow, I really get to hug him again. And as I held him, there was this powerful presence behind me, this overwhelming, wise, cosmic, powerful presence. And I'm holding my son. And I began to become fearful. The guilt began to bubble up again. I mean, this presence is coming closer and closer. I'm holding my son, and yet I'm very much aware he's here because I crashed the car. I fell asleep or dozed off or overcorrected, and his life was cut short. The guilt was bubbling up, and I could feel this presence coming closer behind me, and I'm holding my son, and the presence is right behind me, and I'm weeping, and I had this thought. The thought was, I hope I can be forgiven. And in having that thought, and this almost felt tangible too, I had the thought, I'm holding my son, and then these divine arms just came around and held us both. And it's almost like we just became one, like there was this higher perspective. It's like I became the divine, and I'm holding my son, and then the download came, just this communication. I'm having this thought of, I hope I can be forgiven. And what was communicated by this magnificent being who held me, I'll say God, was there's nothing to forgive. It's all in divine order. And I thought, well, how can that be? How can that be? And I began to see my life. And I was seeing events of my life, and yet I'm in the arms of this loving, divine being. And I'm even looking at my life and seeing things that have happened. I'm even making judgments. I'm like, well, that was a mistake. I didn't mean to do that. But in these beloved arms, it was communicated, what did you learn? What did you learn? There was no judgment. It was just pure, unconditional love. And I mean, I saw things and I thought, well, that was wrong. And I knew it was wrong and I did it anyway. And in these beloved arms, it was communicated, well, that's your judgment of it, not ours. You are so loved. We love you as much as that child you hold. And here I am looking at my son. And he's beloved, he's divine, he's perfect. And yet it was multiplied because that's what I was feeling in these divine arms is you are beloved, you are cherished, you are known. And it was a very personal experience. And yet I knew that rippled out and was effective in every living soul. There was so much love. And I was taught, given, communicated so much. There was a tutorial on choice. And this was interesting because I grew up in a religious home, a conservative Christian home where, it was always God's will. And the being that held me said, I want you to exercise your will. And it's like, well, wait a minute, it's your will be done. I've known that since I was small, and there was so much love. And it was communicated to me, my will is your will. That's how much you're loved. My will is that you have free will. You get to choose. And you can be mad at God your whole life because this accident happened and it wasn't stopped, or you weren't prompted to wake up or whatever. And that would be okay. There was still love. I could beat myself up for the rest of my life because I was driving the car, and that was a choice. But I was given another choice. I was told, you can give your son. You can choose to hand him over. You can trust and hand him over, and therefore exercise your will. And in all that love and all that peace and all that beauty, I kissed my little boy and I handed him over. I trusted and gave him back. And then, back to the hospital bed, back to the injuries and all that went on. And, there was times I thought I should have just held on. I should have just held on. But I learned a lot, and I grieved a lot. I mean, I don't want anyone to think that I had this accident and had these near-death experiences and I was okay. No, I had the accident. I had profound spiritual experiences, and I grieved like anyone else grieved. I had insights. I think I held on to these out-of-body experiences as a way to, that's how I got through it. Otherwise I don't know where or how I would have been. And gosh, my son, my little 7-year-old who survived the accident, he didn't have an experience. He didn't have an out-of-body or near-death experience at all. And it was interesting coming home to him. Like I say, I was in the hospital almost 6 months. He had gone to stay with my brother. And I didn't even get to go home to my house. I was going home to my brother's house when I left the hospital because I still needed home health and physical therapy and all the things that were going on. In fact, I was in a wheelchair. I couldn't even get in the wheelchair myself with all the injuries. That my brothers would have to pick me up and put me in a little electric wheelchair that I could drive with my one arm that was operating. It was time to go home, and my brothers came to get me. They loaded me up. We were going home, and I was so worried about Spencer, my 7-year-old. How's he going to deal with this? How's he going to accept me? I was all broken down in a wheelchair. I had been the rough and tumble dad, and I was so concerned about him. And as we arrived at the house, I mean, we pulled up and pulled into the driveway, and I could see him, 7 years old, watching out the window, looking as my brothers, lifted me into the wheelchair, his uncles, and he's watching his uncles lift his dad in the wheelchair. And I was just mortified, thinking, how's he going to accept this? The amputation and the colostomy bag. And he had seen me in the hospital, but I was under the covers, and, but now we were on his turf. And as I got in the wheelchair, he came running out of the house and he ran toward me, but he ran right past me. And I thought, it's too much. He can't deal with all of this. And so I began to navigate the wheelchair up to the ramp. My brothers had built a ramp for me to drive it into the house, and they were emphatic I do it on my own, which I did. And I was so concerned. And as I turned the wheelchair, I just looked to see where Spencer had gone. I just looked to see where he went. And he actually had run across the street, and he began to knock on all the neighbors' doors. And he was saying, come out, my dad has made it home, come see my dad. And, he eventually ran back, and he did throw himself on my lap, which just about killed me because I still had all the sutures from the abdominal repair. And I bring this up for a specific reason. I mean, there I was holding my little boy who survived. And yeah, I was in a wheelchair. But we had this funny conversation. I said, look, I'm going to work really hard to get well, and they're going to make me a prosthetic limb, and I'll learn to walk again. And are you going to be okay? Or can we do this? And he looked at me and he said, Dad, if you were nothing but a puddle of blood, I would still love you. And we've laughed about that now. He's full grown. But I share this because it was a profound moment. There I was in a wheelchair holding my surviving son. And it was no less divine than being in the other realm holding my son that had passed. Suddenly heaven was right here. That there was nowhere to go or nothing to become, but to be in that perfect moment and realize and experience the unconditional love of a child. My son, he was so happy that I was home, and that felt heavenly. That felt just every bit as big. And it was, it was quite a struggle. It's been quite a life. I'm old, I'm gray, I'm dealing with the injuries still in my old age, but I've been surrounded by people that love me. And I don't know what people do who have to do this alone or without that. Gosh, Spencer's full grown now. He's married. They had a little grandson. Everything has played out in a way where, yeah, if I agreed to come back and to raise this child, and now he's a full grown man and a father himself, it's almost like, okay, I did it. I'm ready to go anytime. I have no fear of death at this point at all. But life is also beautiful. We can embrace the little beautiful things in life. And sometimes I feel like, yeah, heaven is right here. That this is as good as it gets. But that's the near-death experience. It's kind of long. There was a few episodes in and out of the body and some profound things that happened. And it changed me. When I said, I was the red personality, go fight, win, beat the other guy, get the client, get the money, whatever. I think it gave me more compassion. I often felt, gosh, if somebody could feel that unconditional love that I felt in those arms of the divine, I don't even know if that's possible here, but if I could represent that some way, then that would work. That would be my purpose. Also, you don't always get tomorrow. Gosh, have that conversation, send that text, write that letter, and also that we have so much choice, that it's a choice. Things happen to all of us. We all have challenging, hard things, and we can either choose to become bitter or we can choose to become better. And I don't know that I'm any better. I mean, life continues to hold its challenges. But now I look at it in a way where it's like, well, that's for the expansion of my soul. If I'm here to learn, then that's for the expansion of my soul. And what am I learning from the experience? And how can I make myself better? And how can I have more empathy for others rather than, rather than being bitter or thinking, oh, woe is me. But that's the message, is to choose joy, to choose joy, to see life as a learning process and to embrace expansion, whatever that looks like. Let's choose kindness, let's choose joy and move forward together. We might just make heaven right here. It would certainly be a lot better than going to war. It is hard to convey. I mean, how do you tell that to somebody? And when people are in their grief and in their anger and in their division, there's so much emotion around it. And I think maybe I have a cheat sheet. I had this experience, I had this thing happen, which might be very informative for me. I don't know how you convey it. I really don't. I can share my experience, and perhaps others will heal from hearing it. But wow, to know what I know, they might have to do what I did. Not that you have to get in a wreck or have a crash, but to have that connection with something divine, to have some big mystical experience where I truly, truly felt I experienced unconditional love. Different than a theory, different than a thought or a notion. I go out in nature, lay on the ground, sit on a rock. I mean, look at a tree, listen to the birds sing, smile at a stranger, on the street. I mean, I'm sure there's all kinds of meditation and modalities and things to bring on spirituality. I mean, people speak of awakening, and I think if we step into our kindness, if we step into compassion, that's the divinity that's within us. And if we can't do that, then we pass over that divine part. But if we could be more kind, then that seems to expand this ability to connect to something bigger than I am. There's so many things going on in the world, but wow, if I can affect the people in my own little tribe, the people under my roof, my family and closest friends, and if I can see the beauty in the simple things like a sunset or a butterfly or a snowflake, or those little things that are all around us that really do, to me, whisper of the divine, take those in. Just take a moment to be still and connect with the beauty that's around you, in nature, in the sky, in the earth, and let that be our guide. We can learn so much by just watching what's around us. If I could be me and be love and be the best version of me I can possibly conjure up, that might be as complicated as it has to be. Love. I mean, there's been great teachers, gosh, love your neighbor as yourself. Well, it's easy for me to love my neighbor, but wow, that self-love thing, that self-forgiveness. And I can only give what I have. So if I can love myself, then I can love my neighbor more fully. And if I can see the divinity in my neighbor, then I can embrace them a way to say, oh, wow, and they're a manifestation of the Creator. The challenge might be to look in the mirror and say, okay, do I see the divinity within myself? That self-love, that's a big deal.